You know, I mean, it was like very clear they were out to wipe us out. And it was real. It wasn't any fantasy, wasn't any joke. They were out to take our heads. And, you know, we just decided that we were going to live.
Only 2 official documentaries on Assata Shakur exist, and none of them are on major streaming platforms. Well, technically, YouTube is a streaming platform, so that's not 100% accurate, but low-quality uploads of the most popular Assata documentary, Eyes on the Rainbow, have been uploaded to multiple channels not run by the producers of the film. And I wanted to explore this, the lack of stories about Black women revolutionaries in Hollywood in the wake of Assata Shakur's death. The Leading Like a Lady podcast was created to remind Black women, young and old, that acting like a lady is exactly what the world needs in leadership. Don't forget to subscribe to the blog so that you receive updates on when we post directly to your email. In an industry that's lionized one of the most controversial Black Panther figures, Fred Hampton, I wonder why they didn't feel the need to do the same for Miss Shakur. And in a world where even the name Angela Davis has become household, despite her once being the FBI's most wanted criminal, I want to understand why Assata Shakur hasn't become as well known in pop culture. Judas and the Black Messiah, produced in partnership between Black-owned independent media companies Macro and Proximity Media, along with Warner Brothers, the distributor, was released in some theaters and HBO Max simultaneously in February 2021. This was in the midst of the pandemic and a month after the January 6 riots at the U.S. Capitol, so racial and political tensions were high. Most importantly, this movie was the first time a mainstream audience found out that the federal government held some responsibility for killing Fred Hampton, who died at just 21 years old after serving just 1 year as chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panthers. It seemed like almost immediately Fred Hampton became a cult figure once that movie premiered, engaging a new audience in social justice conversations. For example, ABC News and the Shorty Awards reported an increase in social media mentions of Fred Hampton, significantly higher than before the film release. The movie went on to win 2 Academy Awards, one for Best Performance by an Actor in a Supporting Role and for Best Original Song. Suddenly, you saw TV shows like Insecure and the Netflix movie You People feature characters wearing T-shirts that said the FBI killed Fred Hampton, and it wasn't questioned or controversial. Why wasn't that energy used to then tell more stories about the FBI ruining the lives of Black Panthers, especially the Black women of the Black Panther Party?
Every country's had a violent revolution for one reason or the other. Not one of them has the freedom we're all talking about. So we're saying give peace a chance, like nobody's ever done it before.
Outside of a song written by John Lennon in the 60s, no Black female member of the Black Panther Party has gotten any mainstream or pop culture references. And arguably, Assata Shakur's life was in as much danger as Angela Davis, who John Lennon wrote the song for. Why is this? I have theories, but before I share mine, let's see what thoughts are on record already. Angela Davis spoke with the news network Democracy Now! In 2013, saying this: "The FBI decided to focus quite specifically on Black women because somehow they feared, it seemed to me, that the movement would continue to grow and develop, particularly with the leadership and the involvement of Black women." She goes on to say, "The way Assata was represented became an invitation for racists and everyone who assented to the repressive behavior of the U.S. government to focus their hate, to focus vendettas on her." That's a start, I think. I think what Dr. Davis is saying here is that Assata Shakur became the symbol of misogynoir, or the extreme hatred of Black women within the American public. And perhaps that's why it's been harder or riskier to tell her story in a more nuanced way in mainstream media. Honestly, I find that a little hard to understand, given Angela Davis and Assata Shakur were accused of similar crimes, and again, John Lennon put his American visa at risk to make a song about one and not the other. So let's explore more. Another theory has to do with geopolitics between Cuba and the United States. NPR's obituary of Assata Shakur said Shakur's case had long been emblematic of the fraught relations between the U.S. and Cuba. It probably didn't help that enemy numero uno of the U.S. government, Fidel Castro, was the one who granted Assata Shakur political asylum. This was happening during the Cold War and after the Cuban Missile Crisis. I guess an endorsement from someone like him is harder for the average American to digest, especially those who don't read political literature or appreciate the nuance of political figures like Castro. On the day that she died, a local New Jersey newspaper published this public statement from the Democratic governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy. For years, we have worked with the State Department to bring Assata Shakur back to New Jersey so she could face justice for the cold-blooded murder of an American hero. Sadly, it appears she has passed without being held fully accountable for her heinous crimes. So yeah, if that's coming from the current Democrat governor of a state that convicted Shakur 48 years after her escape, then I wonder how willing any Hollywood director or producer is to make a movie telling the other side of her story. Also, much like what some parts of the internet suspected, Barack Obama's presidency was almost as harsh as others towards Assata Shakur. A report in 2019 said, in recognition of National Police Week, the FBI is highlighting 7 cases involving violence against law enforcement officers, one of which involves Shakur. Like, how do you use a made-up holiday to double down on your hatred of this Black woman and to make sure that the world knows that they should hate her too? One last thing I'll say before giving my theory. There is controversy around whether Assata Shakur's conviction for murdering a New Jersey police officer was politically motivated. Remember, during this time and before, the Black Panther Party was targeted by the FBI with extrajudicial executions. Fred Hampton was killed 10 years before Assata Shakur broke out of prison and escaped to Cuba. It was relatively recent history and within this context that the FBI was going out of its way to either kill Black Panther members or weaken the group's political influence. Okay, now my theory. Frankly, I think this is another case of Hollywood undermining the stories of Black women who don't have some sort of close proximity to whiteness. And hear me out, I know that maybe sounds like a stretch, but let me break it down. I would have included to my theory that Black women in Hollywood would have had to be perfect victims in order to have their stories told, but I feel that Angela Davis negates that theory. Neither Dr. Davis or Assata Shakur were perfect victims by America's definition. Both of them spoke out against the U.S. government in politically dangerous ways. They both spoke out against the Vietnam War, which was political suicide at the time. They both advocated for violence as self-defense against state violence or violence perpetuated by the government against oppressed groups. So none of that is safe, and none of that made them, again, in the eyes of the American public, perfect victims. But Dr. Davis had proximity to white academics in respected circles who used their privileges to stand by her when the public attempted to slander her. Charles E. Young, a white man and a member of UCLA's governing board, close to around the time of Angela Davis' arrest, pushed for Dr. Davis to be rehired after she was fired from UCLA for remarks made against the Vietnam War. That's just one example that I write more about in a chapter from a book that I've been working on about Black revolutionary women, and I'm going to have that linked in the show notes for you to read. Assata had the support of Angela Davis, of course, but few, if any, white people in influential spaces spoke up on her behalf, either about her reputation or against her political vilification. And while it took a very long time for Hollywood to fund a movie telling the true story of Fred Hampton's execution, I'm worried that the industry would never be ready to tell a fair and balanced story about a Black woman like Assata Shakur, who the general public believes got away with murdering a white cop. It's interesting to me how it was easier for Americans to switch their views about Angela Davis, a Black woman who they similarly thought got away with murdering a white man, specifically a white judge. Today, though, she's seen in most spaces as a revered academic and public speaker. Yet, Assata Shakur died as a terrorist in the minds of Black and white Americans alike. And I believe that this is largely because no major Hollywood studio or high-net-worth individual was willing to back a well-produced movie, be it a documentary or a biopic about her life. It's very unfortunate, and I worry America is so far gone in the direction of anti-DEI and anti-liberal/leftist thought that it would take a miracle for someone in Hollywood to take on the task of telling Assata's story. But it's essential if we want to preserve the bits of vetted history that we have left under an administration vowing to erase Black American history, especially when it paints white Americans as oppressors. Shout out to Solange, who you already know is my favorite person. She recently invested in preserving archives of Black history under her St. Heron umbrella. We desperately need more Black women in positions of power like her doing this work. So if you enjoyed this episode and what you've learned from it and want to fund Leading Like a Lady's efforts to highlight these gaps in Black women's history, especially in the media, please consider donating to our 501c3 organization using the link that is also going to be in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, share it widely with young people, especially who need to know who Assata Shakur is. Maybe they'll be intrigued by the fact that she is the aunt to the famous and well-renowned Tupac Shakur, amongst so many other facts. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the blog so that you receive updates on when we post directly to your email.